see I'm just selecting a whole bunch of vertices together, because I still don't care so much about the edge loops and the cleanliness of the model. I'm just trying to get the curves looking nicer. I'm going to terminate this curve off here. Not exactly happy with how that's working. So I can just get rid of these points and just let it smooth like that. Then maybe later on I'll do something in here. Select all these vertices and just keep moving this mesh forward. So in this cockpit you could potentially have two seats. The seat back up here and the seat down in here. So because I'm not really happy with the roundness at the top of this object, it's not going to a point like I'd want it to, I'm going to add an FFD 3x3 modifier at the base of the stack and select the front points and just push them out. FFD modifiers are a really awesome way to quickly get things happening on your mesh, getting the overall curves on your mesh happening a little bit more cleanly. So you can see I can generally move the whole thing around without changing anything specific, but I am getting the overall roundness of things looking better. So you can see the before and after. Now the highlights catching on this angle are a bit better. And I can just collapse that down. Now this vent at the back here has gotten way too big. So I'm going to shrink the size of that. And pull all these vertices in. Now as I do that, of course, things are just getting messier and messier, but that's to be expected with this workflow. And in this lesson, I'll try and get to the point where we can start cleaning some stuff up. So just shrinking the size of this vent. When you don't have enough topology to work with, I just like to cut it in. So that little thing I'm doing there that goes really quickly, I'll just show you. So for this area, I'm hitting Q to target weld. I'm target welding, and then as soon as I've hit Q, my finger is already over the Q and T buttons. So if I go back, my left finger's on the Q button, so I hit Q to target weld, and then straight away I hit T to cut. And once I've cut, I right click to undo the cut, select the inside edge, and then control remove it. So in one big speed, it's cut. Sorry, I'll do it again. Every time you try and do it quickly, it doesn't happen. So you cut, target weld, and then remove. Then I can cut out here, or perhaps I can go in and connect an edge loop like this, and that way when I remove this inside point, that geometry is still flowing around correctly. And we've got the potential later on to go in and bevel this outside edge. Start to give things a little bit of thickness. So you can just see I made a mistake there. I moved it down in screen mode, and even though these points aren't lined up, usually I'd like to just go in and do that with view mode. Now I select these points and pull them down. Just to start rounding things off. So now I think we've done enough up here to start trying to block out the underside. So as usual, I'm going to select these edge loops and do the same thing where I give them a little gap. And now we need to work out kind of where we're going to put the next set of vents. You can see we've got two main ones, but to balance out the overall design and shape, we've got the inside cockpit and we've got the two vents up here. But now I want to add in a couple more vents down the bottom. So if I take a look back at the reference image now, you can see to balance things out, we've got 3 vents on either side. So I'm just going to start trying to cut those in. So I'm going to go out a little bit. And then pull an edge loop down. Then from here, I'm going to drag these points out. Just really quickly rotating it all into place. Connect these two together. I'm just going to vary off from the front here. We've got these two lines coming together, but that kind of goes against everything else that's been happening on the geometry. So we're just going to give a little bit of visual rest in that area and have a more large scale kind of soft area. Now I'm going to chamfer this border and then go in and weld these two pieces together, just to keep that edge loop flowing. And then when you do that, you'll need to pull that vertice out. And now that we've got the weld option set up correctly, we can just hit the weld button. And start to experiment with this shape here. So now we've got one more vent to go in and add. So I'm going to connect down there. We need to keep this flowing underneath the ship. Can probably connect these 2 points for now anyway. I'll just bring these down and connect them off. Same thing we did over here. I'm just going to shift drag these in. And the reason I pull that in a little bit is because I want to see what type of curves I've got to work with here. See, I could, in this little area, I could connect a point up here to give this area hardness. And then continue another one down here. And you can see what happens is this point, even though it's messy, I can bring this up. And I can start to experiment with those type of shapes. So once you drag out that topology for these lower vents and stuff, you can see we're starting to look a little bit differently from our original mesh. However, the point of this was to just get a rough kind of similar idea. So I haven't been looking at the reference while creating it, and because of that, we're looking a little bit different in terms of the overall proportions. So there's one thing that I'm noticing that even though I usually wouldn't look at reference, I'd just figure this out myself. One thing that was working nicely was how wide this point came out to. And you can see here we've kind of lost the width on that shape. So what I can do is I can use soft selection at this point to make some more large scale movements. So I'm just going to use soft selection with a very large fall off. I'm going to set this to screen. And then what I like to do is I'll go to view mode. I'm just going to move these out until I'm happy with them. And I can select all these points up here. You know, soft selection, move those up. And I'm just moving things into place. You can see from above, if I just pull these out, we're losing a lot of that roundness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the top view now and just kind of turn off soft selection and start getting this outside point to be nice and smooth. You can see other things are happening from above where this topology should be coming out at a 45-degree angle like so. So I can just select all these points and get that happening. And this is where I swap to that F3 mode, because had I just selected these like that, it would have selected this underneath the underneath vertice. So now I'm just going in, spending a little bit of time, now that we've added so much geometry, and I'm just going to try and clean up a little bit of it and get back some of the consistency that we had at the start. And because we're not time-lapsing this will be a long video. One of the things about the V-Ray course is I can kind of just give users settings to work with, and then they just load that into their scene files and everything's good. But with modeling, you kind of need to go in and understand all the intricate workflow steps that I'm doing, so I can't fast forward and kind of cheat that, because you just won't see what's happening. So I never really believed in time-lapse. I thought that was always more for kind of showing off your modeling. But at the end of the day, whenever I'm working on an object, I have to go through this process of just manually kind of cleaning up everything, and there's no real shortcut to fixing it. You can see we've lost some of the curves that are the fundamental, curves of the whole object. So I don't know what's going to go into this area yet, so I'm just trying to keep things, relatively simple there. I'm not adding any details yet. But I am going to go in now and add another support edge loop around the edge here. Just connect this. If you ever get this point here where things aren't connecting correctly, you can just go down and just flatten it on the X and just move that back to 0. Just experimenting with detaching these 2 points. I'm also going to experiment with getting rid of this point. See how those points flow together. And because I'm not... Actually, I can leave that for now. This should be fine. I've just got to go in and fix up this stuff here. So you can see whenever this outside curve is flowing like this, and this inside curve is flowing along here, and then we've got this inside point that just doesn't line up. So you can see all I'm trying to do is just keep the spacing correct. And nothing more than that at the moment. And when you keep the spacing correct between the polygons, like I'm doing, it's just going to naturally make that smooth result a lot better. So you can see we're getting a little bit of a wobbling happening here in these points. So I'm just trying to fix that now. So just continuing on, I'm just going to rotate the object, and let me just select configure viewports and rotate this down a little bit. One thing we've lost is on this piece here, it doesn't continue to flow correctly. So I'm going to connect down here and then to here, and we're just going to change the distribution of those edge loops. So if I now delete all these 3 points, connect here, target weld up here, and delete this point, you're left with a new bit of geometry that is actually flowing much better. So now we've got some areas that are starting to define the overall shape of the object, and I'm not exactly happy with how sharp this point is, so I'm just going to select the edge loop. And I should note, you can also double select. I use Control E just out of habit, but you can do that also. And if you hit one edge loop and then shift on another, it'll select the ring, but I just like to use Control W. But one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move these points up with edge snap on, and I'm just watching out that it doesn't roll, just to give that edge a bit more roundness. Now I'm going to start to add some depth to all these little curves that we've got going on here. So I can select, just going to clean their shape up a little bit better. Move these back. You can see I need to fix that point also when I do that. So I'm going to select this point, and because it's all one big loop, I can connect an edge there, and I'm just going to drag this out a little bit to the outside. I'm going to go from underneath, and I'm just going to push this out, giving that thickness. And you'll see that because we've got the edge loops so low res and nicely optimized, that everything's going to happen a lot quicker now in terms of giving things shape and dimension. So I'm going to select this inside edge and add a chamfer to it. And we're going to make this quite big. And what will happen is down the bottom you'll get areas that overlap like this. So that's where you just go in and select those and keep cleaning them. And it just comes down to that consistency, you know what I mean? Every time you add new geometry, just put the effort in to refine the little details up. So you can see by adding that last little bit of, that last bridged edge gap there, it's coming into a point now, which is great. Because now I can start to play with this shape and get it really sitting in tightly. And I'll do that to the rest shortly. So I'm going to select these polygons, just pull them out a little bit. So now what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a bevel. And I just do everything by hand. I'm not trying to, you know, use manual tools to get all these things looking perfect. So I'm just going to chamfer this point. So now that's got a bit of hardness on it. Another thing I can do is, if I want to push this in all evenly now, I can hit extrude, and when I go in and change the depth of this, if I go in here, what I can do is I can delete the outside points, and then it's all gone in evenly. I can go in on these points and connect them. Now, I probably wouldn't recommend doing this early. However, I'm only going to do it on this main shape because I'm trying to use this as a guideline for how the rest of the object looks. So I probably won't make many changes to the overall curvature of this shape. And I won't go in and do all this detailing that I'm doing here on these other pieces just yet. But when you do add shape and dimension to them, it makes things a lot easier to start to figure out how to get things, how to get the overall look and feel of the object working more. Just going to connect a couple of points here. And I'm just going to experiment here. I'm just going to go in and cut an edge loop along this edge. And just pull it in like so. But I'm not entirely sure if that's the best way to go about things yet. So now we can pull this out. On this last piece, I've got to go to view mode to pull it out. And our turbo smooth wasn't sitting over the top of our symmetry. Going in, I'm just trying to round this edge off. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is on this piece here, I'm going to connect these two and pull it in like this. I'm going to get this edge loop to flow evenly throughout the outside edge. Pulling these in. And you'll see what I'm about to do in a second when I pull these all in. Now if I select these polygons here, turn off edge snap, I've created a nice cool shape flowing together here. And you'll also notice that if you just let me clean this up, what's happening is this point here should be flowing together. So even though it's not perfect just yet, when we start to add hardness to everything, I'll make sure that this curve flows into this curve here. So you can see we need to pull this like so. This is where I can connect an edge loop along here. So just getting all the spacing here even. I'm just connect an edge loop along this ring. I'm just going to use one. Slide it towards this edge. Now when I select this loop, I can pull these in like so and give it some thickness. So we go through a little phase where things do speed up a little bit, but they will slow down again when we have to start cleaning up all the little points. At the moment, I'm kind of just giving things thickness, which is a quick process, but it will slow down. I'm just going to connect all the way up here. You can see things aren't really flowing nicely at all. So if that's ever the case, you can just undo it. Might need to connect those points. You can see that it's just wobbly a little bit. We need to get that rounded. So this edge loop here needs to get pulled out, as well as these 2 points. This is where I'm swapping to all these different crazy views to make sure that that roundness is perfect. So I want to select these edges, pull these out a little bit more, then the next 2. This point down here isn't clean, so I'm just going to go in and make this more even. So you can see by connecting that edge, it's just changed things to be a little bit better. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect an edge along here and round this piece coming out a bit more. So I select these points, I'll just make them even first. I'm going to pull them out like so, and when I do that I need to select these points as well and pull those out, and now that picks up a highlight just a bit easier. You can see if I undo it, that's not catching a highlight, and as I redo it we get a little bit more shape happening there. And I can probably exaggerate that a little bit. So you're trying to, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to make sure that the highlights are catching on the object, and when you have kind of convex shapes, that doesn't happen as much. If we wanted, you can go in and add another edge loop along here, and that will completely harden that off. You'll need to experiment with just cleaning up that point like so. But I'm not exactly happy with that because now we're kind of ruining that flow of geometry that was there before. So I'm just going to leave it for now and play with it a bit later. Now I can just continue that off, that edge loop, and get rid of it. And even though that's a quad, I want to make sure that that edge loop is the same width across. So I'll connect along here, and then connect another piece here. When I remove this one, I can now move these all together, and it's going to smooth quite nicely. So I've just deleted that because all the spacing of these points is quite even, and then we get to this main piece and it's just not looking the same. So when I delete that, it gives us an opportunity to make sure everything is, you know, roughly the same size, but everything is still blending together. I'm just going to see what I can do about down here, because I'm not really happy with how it's all kind of smooth and flat, and it's not catching any highlights coming outwards. So what I'll do is I've cut along there. I'm going to select all these pieces together and pull it out like so. And then we can even play with trying to pull this out as well. But what I'll need to do is I'll need to pull this down, because now we've got this edge loop flowing here instead of along this new axis. So I'm going to connect a point here. Then I'm going to target weld that down and remove this entire edge loop. And pull it over here like so. Creating a much more flat area that's still blending quite nicely. I mean, it's not fully done yet, so we'll connect these points up. So here I'm just trying to figure out how to smooth this area while still at this low poly phase. So sometimes it's impossible and you're just going to need to accept that you're going to need more geometry. But I like to do my best to try and keep things as low res as possible. And that means working with show and result mode. So I'm using edge constraint to slide, and I can even do it on this side as I'm sliding up. I'm just seeing at what point you can see there things look a lot better than they did there. It's kind of blobby, and then it rounds that point off. So you can get away with so much using show and result mode. But I think I'm just going to get rid of it entirely. So one thing I like in the new Max is this clay options box. So if I tick that, it just gives you a little bit more shape on the object. And I'm still playing with the shape of these points. Wasn't completely happy with that. So I'll connect an edge loop along the center here. If you ever do a connect, and a lot of the times you'll do a connect and you need to slide it, but then if you're too lazy to go in and reset that, I just hit the connect box and then using edge constraint, slide it back up. Just because it's faster than kind of hitting undo, hitting the connect box, and then what I'll do is I'll make a mental note of that, and when the next time I need to connect an edge down the center, then I'll go straight to using the options box. So we're at a good point now to, once again, take a look at the overall mesh, see what's happening from the different views, and kind of gauge where we're going to go from next. Now, one thing that's bugging me is that from the side, this vent doesn't exactly look very rounded. You can see all the curves from the front are kind of behaving quite nicely. There's a few things we need to fix up, but from the side, they don't look as good. You've got a weird shape here and a weird shape here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and select, and I might need to go to the right hand side, select these points, and I don't like how they're going directly back. So I'm going to use soft selection and just decrease the radius there. And I'm just going to pull these down, and then I'm going to shrink the soft selection again and go down again. Then I can pull them back up. Now from here, I want to select these 2 points and just create more shape going up here. I need to lift these back up. I can just rotate those into place. You can see I'm just constantly fixing things, getting them to be more even. So I'm going to go in and make this piece a little bit more beveled. So I'm going to pull this out like so. And then bring it up here and just terminate that last bit. And I can experiment with 2 different things here. I can add an edge loop to both sides. You'll see now we've got edges going along both edges. And see how that looks on the mesh? Because now we've hardened that off. And I think that looks pretty good. Or I can try and do it just on the inside edge, so we've still got a rounded shape on the outside, but then from above, we still got that hard edge. And when I'm starting a mesh, I always like to leave things softer rather than adding too many bevels and things like that when it's not necessary, because if I go in and add 2 edge loops there, it means that later on I'm going to need to add 2 edge loops to everywhere else to keep that consistency. So now here I'm going to make this edge hard. And this will need some refinement later, I can tell. I'm just trying to incorporate that in. I'm just chamfering this outside edge. I'm going to pull all these points in from below. Actually, for now, I'll just leave this issue until we've got some more thickness on the object. It's a little bit too early to be going in and adding in those types of details. So you can see we've got enough edge loops here, but they're not lining up. So to fix that, I've just had to go in and add another. And then because this comes down, it automatically starts going up here. We need to fix that. So I'm going to create the edge loops and make them even along this side. So now I'm trying to get these two bits flowing in together nicely. And then these points I can drag out a little bit more. And I'm just going to experiment on this inside point, making it a little bit taller. So when we do that, we need to fade that off. So that's where I select these 2 points as well. As usual, I'm just rotating everything so it's going in evenly. You can see here these points aren't. So I get them and I rotate them on screen mode in until everything's nice and perfect. Just pulling this point down. And the reason I'm doing that is because at the moment it's not really balanced with anything else in the scene. You can see as I pull down, the angles on this inside edge start to even out, whereas at the moment it's going directly out. So now what's happening is we've got this bit of detail and it's not lining up. So I'm going to connect down there, and now I've got an edge loop to weld these two to. Sorry. And it wasn't bridging because those 2 points were not connected. So I'm just going to go up here and connect 2 points on the inside so that we've got an even number of polygons to line up. Now when I select them and select this loop and bridge, it's going to bridge them nicely. So we're starting to get somewhere. Select these two edges and chamfer them. So this point comes to be a little bit more hard than it was. You can see the before and after. Cockpits usually don't have such soft rounded edges like that. Now I've just given some hardness to those edges. And now I'm going to go in and fix up this next piece. So you can see right now the way that that curve is blending together looks pretty bad. It's not exactly smooth, and this point here isn't round enough. So that's where I'll go in and just have a play with it. So I've swapped to screen mode again. Push these points out. And I'll need to connect to there. This point will end up coming down the center line and connecting up here. So now if I connect edge loops along here, things start to look a little bit better. The same thing we did on this inside edge, I'm now going to do once again. So I'm going to connect one edge, use the extrude tool, and delete the outside edges. And then connect these points together. So now both pieces do the same thing. So even the little subtle things like that make a big difference. You can see it's going in a little bit too much. We need to make sure that all those things are lining up perfectly. Let's see if we can pull them out. So I'm just going to experiment here. I'm going to pull in an edge using the inset tool and then just regularize this. Now this probably isn't the best way to do it because I've got some edge loops here that aren't very clean. But what I like to do is I like to just put one little bit of detail in like this to get a feel for if it's working on the object. So when I'm pulling these points in, it's just to get a feel for, just to add some kind of riveting or something there to make you know that it is a hard surface object. And you can see there's some messiness to it, so I will need to fix that. Pulling this point down more. We'll need to create a chamfer on the edge of that. So far in this entire modeling session, I don't think I've used anything more than bridge, connect, chamfer, and target weld. See, this needs to be pulled in. Now the topology isn't doing exactly what I want here. There's not an edge loop supporting on the inside here, so I'm going to try and get that happening. You can see when I do this now, I've removed the geometry flowing incorrectly. And I still get that hardness that I can potentially round a little bit more. Just look a little bit better. Making sure that nothing is kind of inset wrong. Connect one of these points up to the outside edge. And we do the same down here. So because I don't have any way to terminate that edge loop, what I'm doing is I'm just going to remove it entirely. You can see what I'm doing is when I rotate the camera like this, is I'm getting the highlight to kind of glance over, and then I'm making adjustments. So I can see here the highlight dips in a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll go from here and set it to view mode, and I'll pull out until I think it's looking quite good. Do the same for here. And now I've fixed that dip. Just going to experiment with pulling this under to create that flowing underneath. So you can see we've gone from there to there, and I can just even lift that up a bit higher. So we've got a cool thing happening over here where this piece is joining and then it kind of dips in. So to exaggerate that, I'm going to grab this edge loop here and pull it in like so. Or what I can do is I can put this edge loop a little bit closer in and pull it down like so. Trying to create a little dip there. Then I'll connect. Just before I do that, you can see that that isn't really smoothing. It comes round and then dips in. We want it to just keep going out. And we just want to make sure the spacing of these points is doing the same. So now I'm going to connect and slide down the bottom here. And we create a little bevel. So once again, I'm moving this up to keep the distribution of the polys flowing a bit better. So I just made a mistake and moved that in screen mode without realizing. So same old, I'm just going to use the snap axis on X and just bring that back to 0. So the last thing I want to do before wrapping up the first part of this lesson is I'm just going to go in and add the inside of the vent details just to balance things out and make things look a little bit more mechanical. So just before we do that, I'm just going to grab these outside pieces because going from the front view, I can see here that we don't have that nice roundness going on that we have up here. So we want to keep that continuing on flowing also. And sorry if you've gotten sick of the word flow. I mean, I have at this point, so. But it is all about, like, it is, the word flow basically sums up my workflow. You're trying to keep every single edge loop and every single vertice evenly distributed. So you can see even just little things like that. I've just got to go in and select and move down and readjust. So at the start when we were dragging out these points, this wasn't so important because we're just trying to get things blocked out. But now that it comes down to looking like a sci-fi object, it has to look constructed properly and elegantly, especially because it's sci-fi. If it was more of a army type surface, you wouldn't get these curves because it's not really functional. So I'm going to pull one loop back here. I'm just going to drag this edge in. Scale it a little bit. Now you can see it looks a bit nicer coming out like that. Also under here, I'm just going to grab these points and move them down. And pull them under. Rotating that to get that looking nice. Okay. So what I like to do is when I want to add the inside point on here, I'll select all the edges. So first I'll select the ones that I actually can, then I'll go in. So with all these points selected, I'm just going to shift drag in, very small, barely moving in at all. Then I'm going to select the inside edge. And grab these points and bridge them. then select the inside border and just scale it in a bit. Now you'll notice this won't produce a perfectly even rounded border. We will clean that up later on, but for now I'm just trying to block out the overall size of it. I'm going to weld these bits together. If I want more spacing on the outside, what I can do is I can chamfer and then reselect the border and delete. And now we've got a rough starting point for that inside vent hole. I'm not exactly happy with this base shape yet, so rather than doing that now, I'm probably just going to wait. But one thing I'm going to try and do is on this one we've got an area of flatness, and this is all round the whole way. So I'm going to grab these points, connect an edge down the center, so now things look a little bit more sci-fi. You can see the spacing here changes, so I'm going to pull this under from this angle and make sure that the spacing is the same everywhere. Now I can do the same thing on this piece, just drag it in a little bit and then do it once more and delete that inside. See, what I'm about to do is I'm creating some roundness on the vent shape, and then I'll go in here, add another support loop, and I'm just playing with adding this bevel in. But all these little things like that I change constantly. So you can see the geometry is insanely low res. Everything is smoothing nicely. And overall, we've blocked things out without looking at any reference. I know we've had a kind of previous example to work off of, but you can see that now, even though redoing the mesh, it's looking a lot cleaner this time, because in my head, I've worked out all the problems that were happening in this mesh that I was going to have to go in and clean up. And one of the problems with this mesh is that we've added this, sorry, I keep saying we, it's just something you do as a tutor, I think. But I've added in so many details that it'd be very hard at this point to go in and add more. Whereas for this particular mesh, we've got a really great starting point to potentially add a lot more detail in places. We can start getting things beveling nicer in the next lesson. And overall, we can just start getting in some more rivets and bolts in places. And we've set ourselves up also, one of the things that Bulgarov, or Vitaly Bulgarov, is the first to do in a kind of spectacular fashion, was work on a low-res mesh like this, get the geometry as low-res as possible take it to one iteration, and then collapse it here. So then all the mesh is perfect, but he has heaps of room to go in and cut cut rivets in, cut paneling in, and things like that. So just before we go, I'm going to slap a couple of shaders on this and show you what it's looking like in that render scene. And then we'll wrap up this lesson, and the next lesson I do will be another 3-hour long one. Because you guys are well overdue now for some good content, we'll try and make this whole piece a 10-hour 3-part series. So I've just loaded up the model into the Octane scene, and if I just unpause this, you can see when I rotate around, we've got a pretty good idea of what's happening now. But the problem is, at the moment, this mesh doesn't have enough small scale detail to give it a truly manufactured appearance, and it doesn't have enough detail to give it a larger sense of scale. So it looks quite small at the moment. It doesn't, to me anyway, it doesn't look like a human could fit in there. So in the next lesson, we're going to go in and finish off with all the pieces that have been currently modeled. So that means going in, making sure the large scale bevels are finished, all the little design curves are cut in, things like that. And that will take up the next 2 to 3 hours. Then in the final lesson, we'll collapse the mesh at subdiv 2 and go in to add all the little details that will give this model a proper sense of scale. So I'm talking all the tiny little things that you'll see guys like Bolgarov do. We'll go in and add those. So if I just load up Photoshop, hopefully you can see now where I was coming from at the start of the lesson, where you can steal curves from tattoos like this to incorporate them into your mesh. And then when you build a mesh around it, you get a really cool kind of unique style happening. So this is what I was doing on my Moro character and some of the other smaller models I've created since then, and it's worked for me pretty consistently. So not every tattoo is going to be working harmoniously. Try and work with symmetrical ones, but even if you're just trying to look for curves, I'd highly suggest doing a little bit of research into this type of workflow. Now, on top of that, this is the first lesson I've ever created in my whole career about designing and modeling as I go. The lessons leading up to this were more about the fundamentals and less about how to actually make stuff look cool. So basically what I'm trying to say is hopefully in the future I get a little bit more confident in that, and I get a bit better at explaining what's happening on the screen and kind of how I'm thinking in terms of like what's happening in terms of the curves going on in my head and how I'm trying to visualize that stuff. So lastly, I just want to thank you guys for patiently waiting for these lessons. Like I was saying, I'm going to try and make these next 2 lessons make up for the large gap in time between lesson 7 and this one. And hopefully by the end of these 3 lessons, you've got a pretty solid idea of how to go about creating some of your own objects. And I'd love to see you guys tackle and show me some of your own results so that I can give you some constructive feedback on them and hopefully get you guys up to a level where you're confident in doing stuff like this. Now, I'm hoping to get out about 20 lessons on this course. There are a couple of people concerned that I wasn't able to produce all the lessons in time. However, once the Mastering V-Ray course finishes, I'm hopefully going to have about 6 weeks there purely to work on the hard surface to catch up on that. So once again, thanks heaps, dudes. I know you've been really patient and I really appreciate that. I just want to thank you that the fact that my first fight went really well, and I've got another one next Saturday, so wish me luck on that because I'm going to need it. But cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.